After his wife won $20 million, she filed for divorce and laughed while signing the papers until the judge reads the prenup. "I'll destroy you in court, Alden. You'll never measure up. You've always been beneath me, and I'll never let you touch my money. If you think you're walking away with a single dime of that $20 million, you're a bigger fool than I thought." Those were the last words Sloane Brooks whispered to her husband before winking at her divorce attorney and signing those papers with a smile that could shatter diamonds. She had no idea that the man sitting across from her had already orchestrated the most brilliant legal reversal in divorce court history, using her own father's prenup against her. What happened next will make you question everything you think you know about marriage, money, and revenge. Viewers, have you ever trusted someone so completely that their betrayal felt like a physical blow to your chest? How do you handle it? Drop your thoughts in the comments. The alarm screamed at 5:30 a.m. in the small Brooklyn apartment, cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like a rusty knife. Alden Brooks rolled out of bed, his body already aching from yesterday's concrete pour on the Manhattan high-rise project. At 32, construction work had carved deep lines around his eyes and permanent calluses on his palms, but he never complained. Not once. By 6 a.m., he was gulping black coffee from a thermos while lacing up steel-toed boots that had seen better years. The morning ritual never changed. Kiss sleeping Sloane on the forehead, peek into 6-year-old Tessie's room to watch her tiny chest rise and fall, then grab his hard hat and head into the city that never slept. The construction site on East 47th Street buzzed with activity by 7 a.m. sharp. Alden commanded respect among the crew, not because he was the loudest or toughest, but because he worked harder than anyone else. While other guys took smoke breaks, Alden studied blueprints. While they complained about overtime, he volunteered for it. "Brooks," his foreman Tony called out over the machinery noise. "Your wife called the office again. Something about picking up groceries on your way home." The other guys snickered. Everyone knew Sloane didn't work, hadn't worked since Tessie was born. Her family had means, as she liked to say, though they weren't exactly wealthy. Just comfortable enough to make Alden feel like he was always catching up. By 6 p.m., covered in dust and concrete residue, Alden would race through traffic to make it home for dinner. Not because Sloane demanded it, but because those evening hours with Tessie were the fuel that kept him going. "Daddy," Tessie would squeal, launching herself into his arms despite his dirty work clothes. Her gap-toothed smile could melt the stress from the hardest day. Sloane would emerge from the kitchen, looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Blonde hair perfect, makeup flawless, wearing clothes that cost more than Alden made in a week. She was beautiful, there was no denying that. Classic features, refined mannerisms, the kind of woman who turned heads when she walked into a room. "How was your day, honey?" she'd ask, but her attention was already drifting to her phone or the evening news. After dinner, while Sloane chatted with her friends from the country club, friends who barely acknowledged Alden's existence, he'd retreat to Tessie's room for their sacred ritual. Story time. "Read The Princess one again, Daddy," Tessie would whisper, curled against his side. As he read about brave princesses and noble knights, Alden couldn't shake the feeling that he was playing the role of the stable boy in his own life story. But Tessie's sleepy giggles made every sacrifice worth it. He had no idea that in just a few years, everything would explode. Thursday morning started like any other. Alden left for work at 6 a.m. sharp while Sloane lingered over coffee in her silk robe. She had her weekly routine down to a science: yoga at 10, lunch with the girls at noon, grocery shopping in the afternoon. But today felt different. Maybe it was the October air, crisp with possibility, or maybe it was the lottery ticket she'd bought on impulse at the corner deli. 5 quick-pick numbers that would change everything. She scratched the silver coating with her manicured nail while standing at the kitchen counter, half watching the morning show. The first number matched, then the second. Her heart picked up pace. Third number, match. Fourth, match. When the 5th number aligned perfectly, Sloane's world stopped spinning. The scream that tore from her throat shattered the morning quiet, echoing through their modest apartment and probably waking half the building. She stared at the ticket, blinking hard, certain her eyes were playing tricks. But the numbers didn't change. $20 million. Her hands shook as she called the lottery office, then her mother, then anyone who would listen. Within an hour, word had spread through their Brooklyn building like wildfire. Mrs. Harrison from 3B appeared with homemade cookies. The Johnsons brought champagne they'd been saving for their anniversary. Even old Mr. William, who barely spoke English, showed up with tears in his eyes and a congratulatory hug. By the time Alden burst through the door at 4 p.m., having left work the moment he got Sloane's hysterical phone call, their tiny apartment overflowed with neighbors, friends, and half the construction crew. He found Sloane in the center of it all, radiant with joy and disbelief, holding court like a queen. When their eyes met across the crowded room, time stopped. This was it. Their moment. Their escape from paycheck to paycheck living, from choosing between Tessie's school supplies and the electric bill. Alden swept Sloane into his arms, spinning her around as everyone cheered. Then he scooped up Tessie, lifting her high above his head while she giggled uncontrollably. "We're rich, Daddy. Mommy says we can buy a castle." The celebration lasted until midnight. Champagne corks popped, neighbors shared stories of their own lottery dreams, and for one perfect evening their cramped apartment felt like a palace. But after the last guest left and Tessie had fallen asleep clutching her stuffed rabbit, Alden sat alone at his old laptop in the dim glow of the kitchen light. While Sloane slept off the champagne and excitement, he researched investment strategies, tax implications, trust funds for Tessie's education. Page after page of financial advice scrolled past as he took careful notes in his construction worker's handwriting. College funds, retirement accounts, business opportunities. He wanted to do this right, to make their windfall last forever. He had no idea that in just 3 weeks, Sloane would be using that same money to try to destroy him. The lottery ticket sat on the counter, innocent as a death warrant. The first week after the win, Sloane seemed distracted. She'd stare at her phone for hours, scrolling through luxury real estate websites and designer boutiques. When Alden suggested they sit down together to plan their financial future, she'd wave him off with a vague smile. "Later, honey, I'm still processing all this." But her eyes had changed. They looked through him now, not at him. The second week brought new purchases. Designer handbags appeared on their kitchen table. Expensive jewelry boxes materialized on her dresser. When Alden asked about the bills, Sloane's response cut sharp. "It's my money, Alden, I want it." My money. Not our money. The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. She started taking phone calls in the bedroom with the door closed. Her laughter drifted through the thin walls, but it sounded different, higher, more refined, like she was practicing a new version of herself. When Alden knocked to ask who was calling, she'd end the conversation abruptly. "Just Mom, nothing important." The third week, Sloane barely spoke to him at all. She'd wake up late, spend hours getting ready, then disappear for most of the day. Shopping, she claimed, meeting with financial advisors, looking at houses in Manhattan. "What about Tessie's school district?" Alden asked one evening as his daughter colored at the kitchen table, oblivious to the tension crackling between her parents. "We can afford private school now. The best private school in Brooklyn." Everything was about what they could afford now, never about what they wanted or what made sense for their family. Money had become Sloane's answer to every question, her solution to every problem, including the problem of being married to a construction worker. Then came the Thursday that shattered everything. Alden walked through the door at 6:15 p.m., same as always, covered in dust from the job site. Tessie was at her grandmother's house for a sleepover, something Sloane had arranged without consulting him. The apartment felt too quiet, too empty. He found Sloane in the living room, sitting ramrod straight on their old couch, designer clothes immaculate, a manila envelope clutched in her manicured hands. Her expression was ice cold, calculating, like she'd been rehearsing this moment. Without a word, she stood up and slammed the envelope against his chest. The impact knocked him back a step, and papers scattered across the worn carpet. "You're not in my class, Alden. You're a pathetic loser. Let's get divorced." The words hit harder than any physical blow. Alden stared at the woman he'd loved for 8 years, searching for any trace of the person who'd screamed with joy just 3 weeks ago, who'd let him spin her around their tiny kitchen while neighbors cheered. She was gone, replaced by this cold, cruel stranger. "What is my offense?" "I will not sign this." Sloane's smile was razor sharp. "We'll see you in court then." She walked past him toward the bedroom, her heels clicking against the hardwood like a countdown to destruction. 21 days. That's all it had taken for $20 million to reveal who his wife really was. The glass towers of downtown Manhattan reflected Alden's hollow stare as he walked through the revolving doors of Connor Hale's law firm. His work boots felt out of place on the polished marble floors, but he didn't care anymore. Everything felt out of place now. Connor Hale had been Alden's friend since high school, the scholarship kid who'd clawed his way through law school while Alden learned construction. Different paths, same determination. When Connor opened his practice 5 years ago, Alden had been his first client, helping navigate the paperwork for a small business loan. Now Alden needed a different kind of help. Connor's office overlooked the Hudson River, all mahogany and leather-bound books. He looked up from his desk as Alden walked in, immediately registering the devastation written across his friend's face. "Jesus, Alden, you look like hell." Alden collapsed into the chair across from Connor's desk, the divorce papers crumpled in his fist. His voice came out broken, barely above a whisper. "She wants divorce." 3 weeks after winning $20 million. Connor leaned forward, his lawyer instincts kicking in as Alden explained everything. The lottery win, the gradual change, the cold calculation in Sloane's eyes when she'd thrown the papers at him, the way she'd dismissed Tessie like an inconvenience. "She says I'm not in her class." "Never was." Connor's jaw tightened. He'd met Sloane at Alden's wedding, watched her barely acknowledge the blue-collar guests while fawning over her father's business associates. He'd never liked her, but he'd kept his mouth shut out of loyalty to his friend. Listen to Alden, me, carefully. In New York, whatever any of the party acquires during marriage are typically considered marital property, which means she'll fight it. Her family has money, connections. I'm just some construction worker who got lucky marrying up. Connor shook his head. Money doesn't change the law. But we need to be strategic here. He leaned forward, studying his friend's defeated expression. Think carefully. Did anything ever exist between you two? Agreements, contracts, any legal documents that could matter here? Alden stared at the floor, his mind churning through 8 years of marriage. Bank accounts, insurance policies, the mortgage they'd never qualified for on his salary alone. I don't know. We never really talked about legal stuff. Her father handled most of the important paperwork when we got married. Connor's eyes sharpened. What kind of paperwork? And then it hit Alden like a sledgehammer to the chest. His head snapped up, eyes wide with sudden realization. The elegant dining room, crystal glasses, Grant Harrington's cold stare across the mahogany table, legal documents spread out like a trap. The prenup, he whispered. 8 years earlier. The Harrington estate in Westchester County sprawled across manicured lawns like something from a movie set. Alden's beat-up Honda looked pathetic in the circular driveway, dwarfed by Grant Harrington's Mercedes and his wife's BMW. At 24, Alden had never felt more out of place. His only good suit, bought at Men's Warehouse with overtime money, felt cheap against the backdrop of old money elegance. But Sloane's hand in his gave him courage. She loved him. That had to be enough. The engagement dinner was a formal affair. Crystal glasses caught the light from an antique chandelier. The dining room table could seat 12, though tonight only 4 sat around its polished surface. Grant and Margaret Harrington at opposite ends, Sloane and Alden side by side like defendants awaiting judgment. Grant Harrington commanded attention without saying a word. silver-haired, sharp-eyed, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Alden made in 3 months. He'd built his wealth through commercial real estate deals and had the calculating gaze of a man who viewed every interaction as a transaction. Dinner conversation stayed politely superficial until Margaret excused herself to check on dessert. That's when Grant's mask slipped. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder, sliding it across the mahogany table with the precision of a chess master making his final move. "If you want my daughter, you'll sign this prenup." The words hung in the air like smoke. Alden felt Sloane tense beside him, but she said nothing. Her silence spoke volumes. Grant's voice carried the cold authority of a man accustomed to getting his way. "Whatever you owned before the marriage stays yours. But anything acquired during the marriage belongs to the marriage." Alden stared at the legal documents, the words blurring together in dense paragraphs of legalese. Marital assets, community property, distribution of wealth acquired during matrimony. The language was complex, but the message seemed simple enough. "I don't understand all this legal talk," Alden admitted, his cheeks burning with embarrassment. Grant's smile was razor thin. "It's insurance, son. Protection for both parties." Sloane finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Daddy, is this really necessary? It's how these things are done in our family." Alden looked at the woman he loved, saw the conflict in her eyes, the way she couldn't quite meet his gaze. This was her world, her family, her rules. If he wanted her, he had to play by them. Without reading another word, Alden picked up the expensive pen Grant offered and scrawled his signature across the final page. "I'm marrying her, not her money." Grant's approving nod felt like a benediction. Margaret returned with chocolate mousse, and the conversation shifted to wedding plans and honeymoon destinations. Grant put his copy of the prenup in a briefcase and gave him a copy. The memory faded as Connor's voice cut through the flashback. "Alden, you still with me?" Alden blinked, refocusing on his friend's concerned face. "The prenup. Anything acquired during marriage belongs to the marriage." Connor leaned forward. "Do you still have your copy?" Alden blinked, then remembered the manila envelope shoved in the back of his sock drawer since the wedding night. "Yes," he whispered. "I still have it." Connor's grin was predatory. "Then we've got her." The Manhattan family court buzzed with the energy of broken dreams and bitter endings. Courtroom 3B was packed beyond capacity. Word had spread about the lottery divorce case, drawing spectators like vultures to fresh roadkill. Reporters lined the back rows, smartphones ready to capture the downfall of New York's newest millionaire. The heavy oak doors swung open with theatrical precision as Sloane Harrington Brooks made her entrance. She glided down the center aisle like a runway model, designer heels clicking against polished floors. Her Chanel suit probably cost more than most people's rent, and she wore it like armor. Every eye in the courtroom tracked her movement. Grant Harrington followed 2 steps behind, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expression radiating the confidence of a man who'd never lost a legal battle. Father and daughter moved with synchronized arrogance, owning the space like they owned everything else. Sloane's smile was dazzling and cruel as she turned to face the gallery. Her voice carried clearly across the packed courtroom, each word designed to cut deep. "I'll destroy you in court, Alden. You'll never measure up. You've always been beneath me, and I'll never let you touch my money. If you think you're walking away with a single dime of that 20 million, you're an even bigger fool than I thought." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some spectators looked scandalized by her public cruelty. Others seemed entertained by the drama unfolding before them. This was better than reality TV. The courtroom doors opened again, this time quietly. Alden Brooks entered with Connor Hale at his side, their presence a stark contrast to the Harrington theatrics. Alden wore his only good suit, the same one from his wedding 8 years ago, now slightly too tight across the shoulders from years of physical labor. 6-year-old Tessie walked between them, her small hand clutched in her father's calloused grip. She wore a yellow sundress and looked confused by all the attention, her wide eyes taking in the crowded room with innocent bewilderment. The bailiff gently guided Tessie to a seat in the front row, where a court-appointed child advocate waited. She waved at her father before settling in, completely unaware that her entire world was about to change. Sloane watched this tender exchange with visible disgust, then turned back to the divorce papers spread across the defendant's table. Her laughter echoed through the courtroom as she signed her name with flourish, each letter a declaration of her superiority. "You'll leave with nothing?" she taunted, not bothering to lower her voice. "Just like you came into this marriage, a nobody with empty pockets and impossible dreams." The gallery erupted in whispers. Several spectators shook their heads at her viciousness. Even the court reporter looked uncomfortable as she transcribed Sloane's cruel words. Judge Avery Collins entered through the side door, her black robes flowing behind her like justice personified. 30 years on the bench had taught her to read people quickly, and her sharp eyes immediately assessed the dynamics playing out in her courtroom. "All rise," the bailiff commanded. The moment of truth had arrived. Judge Avery Collins settled into her chair with the deliberate movements of someone who'd presided over thousands of broken marriages. Her weathered hands opened the case file, and for several heartbeats the only sound in the packed courtroom was the whisper of turning pages. Sloane sat at the plaintiff's table, practically glowing with confidence. Her manicured fingers drummed against the polished wood as she shot triumphant glances toward the gallery. This was her moment of vindication, proof that she could discard her blue-collar husband like an ill-fitting dress. Grant Harrington leaned back in his chair, the picture of smug satisfaction. His expensive suit and practiced smile radiated the arrogance of a man who'd never faced consequences for his actions. The prenup he'd crafted 8 years ago was about to be used against his daughter. At the defendant's table, Alden sat motionless, his calloused hands folded in his lap. 8 years of construction work had taught him patience, but waiting for his life to be decided by legal documents pushed even his endurance to the breaking point. Connor placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Judge Collins cleared her throat, and the courtroom fell into absolute silence. Even the reporters stopped scribbling, sensing the weight of what was about to unfold. After reviewing all submitted documents and evidence, Judge Collins began, her voice carrying the authority of 3 decades on the bench. "I must address the prenuptial agreement filed by both parties." Sloane's smile widened. This was it, the moment her father's foresight would pay off in spectacular fashion. The judge's eyes moved across the prenup's pages with surgical precision. Her expression remained neutral, professional, giving nothing away as she absorbed the legal language that would determine how $20 million would be distributed. This court recognizes the validity of the prenuptial agreement signed by Alden Brooks and Sloane Harrington on March 15th, 8 years ago. Sloane actually clapped her hands together, unable to contain her glee. Several spectators leaned forward, expecting to witness her complete victory. But Judge Collins wasn't finished. "However," she continued, her voice rising to fill every corner of the courtroom, "the prenuptial agreement clearly states that all assets gained during the marriage belong to the marital estate and are subject to equitable distribution." The words hit the courtroom like a physical blow. Sloane's confident smile froze on her face as the implications sank in. The lottery ticket was purchased during the marriage using marital funds. Therefore, the $20 million winnings constitute marital property and shall be divided equally between both parties. The explosion of sound was instantaneous. Gasps filled the room like air rushing into a vacuum. Reporters frantically scribbled notes. Spectators turned to each other in amazement, unable to believe what they'd just witnessed. Sloane's laughter cut off mid-note, replaced by a strangled sound that was part shock, part rage. Her face drained of color as the reality crashed over her like a tidal wave. At the defendant's table, Alden Brooks sat perfectly still, his quiet strength finally visible to everyone in the room. 8 years of being told he wasn't good enough had prepared him for this moment. Justice, it seemed, could read prenups better than the people who signed them. The courtroom erupted in chaos as Sloane's world collapsed around her. $10 million, half of everything she'd thought was exclusively hers, would go to the man she'd just publicly humiliated. The irony was so perfect it felt scripted. Sloane shot to her feet, her designer chair clattering backward against the marble floor. Her face had transformed from confident smugness to raw fury, the mask of sophistication finally slipping to reveal the entitled rage beneath. "This is impossible," she shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. "That money is mine. I bought the ticket, I scratched it, I won it." Judge Collins's gavel cracked like thunder. "Mrs. Brooks, you will maintain order in my courtroom or face contempt charges." But Sloane was beyond reason, beyond the careful control she'd maintained throughout their marriage. 8 years of looking down on Alden, of tolerating his blue-collar existence while dreaming of something better, had led to this moment of ultimate humiliation. Grant Harrington grabbed his daughter's arm, trying to pull her back into her seat, but she yanked away from him. The prenup he'd designed to protect his family's interests had become the weapon of their destruction. "Fine," Sloane screamed, pointing an accusatory finger at Alden. "You want half my money? You can have it. But if he thinks he's getting half, he can keep Tessie too. I want my freedom. I want out of this pathetic excuse for a life." The words hung in the air like poison. The packed courtroom fell into stunned silence as everyone processed what they'd just heard. A mother abandoning her 6-year-old daughter over money. Even the hardened reporters looked disturbed. Judge Collins's expression hardened to granite. Her pen moved across the legal documents with swift, decisive strokes. "Let the record show that Mrs. Brooks has voluntarily relinquished primary custody of the minor child." Her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Primary custody is hereby awarded to Mr. Alden Brooks." The court officer escorted Tessie from the front row, her small hand reaching for her father as confusion clouded her innocent eyes. She didn't understand the legal terminology, but she recognized the finality in the judge's voice. Alden dropped to one knee as his daughter approached, pulling her into his arms with the gentle strength that had defined his entire approach to fatherhood. Her yellow sundress was wrinkled from sitting in the hard courtroom chair, but her trust in him remained unshaken. "Daddy's got you," he whispered against her hair, his voice breaking with emotion. "Always." Tessie wrapped her small arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. "Are we going home now, Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart. We're going home." Behind them, Sloane stood frozen in the wreckage of her own making. In her desperate attempt to claim everything, she'd lost what mattered most. $10 million felt hollow compared to the warmth of a child's unconditional love. The gavel fell one final time, sealing their fate. Sometimes justice wears work boots and speaks with calloused hands. The ink on the divorce decree was barely dry when Alden Brooks walked out of the courthouse with Tessie's small hand in his. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to waste this second chance. The check for his half of the lottery winnings cleared within a week. $10 million. For a man who had spent his life scraping by on union wages, the sum felt like fantasy. But Alden didn't splurge. He didn't buy a mansion or sports car. He opened a savings account in Tessie's name. He met with Connor Hale and a financial planner. He asked hard questions, listened, and took notes in his careful block letters. Within a year, Alden quietly purchased equipment and registered Brooks Build Partners. By year 3, his crews were bidding on city projects. He was no longer the man climbing stairs to a Brooklyn walk-up. He was the man signing contracts from a rented office in Midtown Manhattan. Tessie stayed rooted in Brooklyn, thriving at her neighborhood school where her father's presence gave her stability. On weekends, Alden took her to piano lessons, hiking trips upstate, even father-daughter science fairs. Every milestone in her childhood had one constant: her dad standing in the crowd, clapping the loudest. Sloane's path looked very different. At first, she was unstoppable. Vacation photos in Mykonos, shopping sprees on Fifth Avenue, charity galas in gowns that cost more than Alden's monthly payroll. She surrounded herself with people who called her glamorous, envied her lifestyle, drank her champagne. But the money bled away. 5-star hotels became habit. Designer labels piled high in closets she never opened. Investments turned into scams sold by smooth-talking brokers who saw her as easy prey. Her phone stopped ringing. The party invitations dried up. Friends drifted to newer, wealthier circles. By the 5th year, Alden was a phenomenon in the construction industry, respected for his integrity, wealth multiplying steadily. Sloane, once the woman who laughed while signing away her marriage, was nearly penniless. And then came the collapse that no one had seen coming. Grant Harrington's company, the proud Harrington Holdings, stumbled into crisis. A series of disastrous deals gutted its reserves. Creditors circled like sharks. Bankruptcy loomed. For the first time in his silver-haired life, Grant Harrington faced the humiliation of begging. And the only man who could save them was the same construction worker he once sneered at. The Blacktown car rolled up to the glass-front headquarters of Brooks Build Partners. The Harringtons stepped out, smaller than Alden had ever remembered them. Grant's silver hair thinner, Margaret clutching her pearls like a lifeline, and Sloane in a wrinkled dress that looked borrowed. They were escorted upstairs to Alden's office. The contrast was stark. Where once he'd walked into their mansion in a cheap suit, now they stood in his empire. An office lined with blueprints of city projects, framed photos of Alden in a hard hat beside Tessie at ribbon cuttings, and awards for excellence in community building. Alden looked up from behind his desk. Time had chiseled his face with quiet confidence. He wasn't just a construction worker anymore. He was a man who had built something lasting. Sloane spoke first, her voice trembling. "Alden, we need your help. Dad's company, it's failing. Without a partner like you, it won't survive." Grant swallowed hard, pride crumbling. "I misjudged you, son. I see that now. Please, Harrington Holdings employs hundreds. If you'd consider—" Alden rose slowly, his eyes moving from Grant to Sloane. She looked smaller, diminished, the fire in her eyes burned out. He thought of Tessie, now 11, waiting at home with homework spread across the kitchen table. "When I had nothing," Alden said quietly, "I still showed up for family. I showed up for Tessie, for Sloane, for all of you. And you laughed at me, threw me away." Sloane's eyes filled with tears. "I was wrong. I see it now. Please, Alden, give us another chance." A long silence filled the office, broken only by the hum of city traffic below. Alden finally stepped to the door, opening it wide. "My building days are for Tessie's future," he said evenly. "Not for people who treated me like I didn't belong. Some doors, once closed, stay closed." The Harringtons stood frozen, stunned by the finality of his words. Alden didn't slam the door. He closed it softly, the sound echoing louder than any gavel. Inside, Alden walked back to his desk, picked up Tessie's latest school photo and smiled. Outside, the Harringtons faced the bitter truth. They had lost everything, not just money, but dignity, respect, and the one man who had once loved them enough to sign away his pride. Do you think Alden was wrong not to help them? If you were in his shoes, what would you do? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more interesting and true-to-life stories.